You come back from space, you're a hero. You step off that shuttle, you wave to the cameras, maybe you hug your family. But behind the scenes, the moment your boots hit solid ground, NASA quietly begins one of the most invasive biological monitoring programs in the history of human science. And most astronauts don't talk about what that actually involves. Today we're going inside that process. 10 things NASA is secretly tracking in astronauts' bodies after they return to Earth. And some of these are going to fundamentally change how you think about what space actually does to a human being. Let's start with number 1, and this one sets the tone for everything that follows. Number 1, bone density loss that doesn't fully reverse. Here's what most people assume. Astronaut goes to space, spends 6 months on the International Space Station, comes back, does some physical therapy, and bounces back to normal. That's the story we tell ourselves. But NASA's longitudinal data tells a different and considerably darker picture. The agency monitors returning astronauts' skeletal systems for months, sometimes years, after landing. Bones in the lower body, particularly in the hips and spine, can lose density at rates that rival what elderly patients experience over a decade, compressed into just a few months. NASA tracks this obsessively because they've discovered something alarming. Full recovery doesn't always happen. Some astronauts retain measurable bone density deficits years after their mission ended. The monitoring involves regular scans, blood markers, and calcium metabolism studies that never fully stop. Number 2, heart shape. Yes, the actual physical shape of your heart changes in space. On Earth, your heart works constantly against gravity, pumping blood upward. Remove gravity from the equation, and the heart essentially gets lazy. It becomes more spherical, rounder. NASA has documented this shift using echocardiograms and cardiac imaging both during and after missions. What they're quietly watching for post-return is how completely, or incompletely, the heart reshapes itself back to its normal, elongated form. There's growing concern within the agency's medical teams about whether repeated long-duration missions accelerate a kind of cardiac remodeling that persists after landing. This is one of the more quietly alarming things they track. Because a rounder, weaker heart pumping against Earth's gravity is a cardiovascular risk. Number 3, the visual system and intracranial pressure. This one you may have heard whispers about, but the full scope of what NASA monitors is rarely discussed openly. A significant portion of astronauts who return from long missions report vision changes. Some experience shifts that are permanent. What's happening is a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid pressure inside the skull. Without gravity pulling fluids downward, they pool toward the head, pushing against the optic nerves and physically reshaping the eyeballs. NASA tracks this through optic nerve imaging, MRI studies of the brain, and detailed vision assessments at regular intervals after landing. What they're watching for is whether the pressure normalizes, whether the eye shape recovers, and, critically, whether any of the neurological changes that come with that fluid shift have downstream effects on cognition and mental performance. Number 4, gut microbiome disruption. Your body is home to trillions of microorganisms, and space absolutely wrecks that ecosystem. The diet changes, the radiation exposure, the stress, the altered sleep cycles, all of it reshapes which microbes thrive and which ones disappear. NASA conducts detailed microbiome surveillance on returning astronauts. Because they've found that the gut flora changes documented in space sometimes don't resolve for months after Earth return. They're collecting stool samples, analyzing microbial diversity, and cross-referencing it with immune function data. Because a disrupted gut microbiome doesn't just affect digestion. It affects mood. It affects cognitive clarity. It affects immune response. And right now, they're trying to understand whether those disruptions are contributing to the psychological symptoms that many astronauts quietly report after landing. Number 5, immune system dysregulation. Speaking of immune function, this is one of the most heavily monitored and least publicly discussed areas in post-mission medicine. In space, the immune system doesn't just weaken. It behaves strangely. It misidentifies targets. Dormant viruses like the Epstein-Barr virus and certain herpes family viruses reactivate in the bodies of astronauts during and after missions at higher rates than in the general population. NASA's medical teams monitor white blood cell counts, inflammatory markers, cytokine levels, and viral reactivation patterns for extended periods after astronauts land. The reason this is particularly unsettling is that it suggests the immune system, after prolonged exposure to the space environment, is somehow recalibrated. It's not just tired, it's operating differently. And NASA is still working out what that means for long-term health. Number 6, cognitive and psychological performance. This is where things get especially sensitive. NASA does not exactly advertise the fact that returning astronauts undergo comprehensive cognitive and psychological evaluation programs that track things like memory, attention span, emotional regulation, and decision-making speed. These evaluations continue for months or even years after a mission concludes. Some astronauts, particularly those returning from long-duration missions, show measurable cognitive performance changes. Not dramatic, not Hollywood dramatic, but real and detectable. Slower processing, slight memory disruption, emotional flatness that takes time to resolve. NASA is collecting this data systematically. comparing it against pre-mission baselines established long before the flight. They're building a picture of what repeated exposure to space does to the brain over time, and they're not rushing to publish the results. Number 7, muscle fiber composition changes. Everyone knows astronauts lose muscle mass in space. That's old news. What's less discussed is what NASA has discovered about the type of muscle tissue that rebuilds after return. Your muscles are made of different fiber types. Some are built for endurance, others for explosive power. In space, there's a measurable shift in muscle fiber composition. And what NASA has found when monitoring returning astronauts is that the rebuilding process doesn't perfectly mirror what was lost. The distribution of muscle fiber types can shift in ways that persist for a significant period after landing. NASA tracks this through biopsies, electromyography, and detailed physical performance testing, because these changes affect balance, reaction time, and the overall physical resilience of astronauts who are expected to return to flight. Number 8, telomere behavior. Telomeres are the protective end caps on your chromosomes, and their length is often used as a biological marker of aging. This is one of the most fascinating and quietly alarming things NASA has discovered through its twin studies and long-duration mission data. Space exposure appears to cause rapid telomere elongation, which sounds positive until you understand that upon return to Earth, there's a sharp telomere shortening event. Some astronauts end up with telomere lengths shorter than their pre-mission baseline. NASA is monitoring telomere dynamics in returning astronauts because this pattern may be linked to elevated cancer risk and accelerated cellular aging. The mechanism isn't fully understood, which is exactly why the monitoring doesn't stop at landing. Number 9, fluid shifts in kidney function. When astronauts return to Earth's gravity, fluids that had redistributed throughout the body during the mission are suddenly being pulled back downward by gravity. This creates a significant and rapid physiological adjustment, and it puts serious strain on the kidneys. NASA has identified increased kidney stone risk in returning astronauts. The monitoring here is intense because the combination of altered calcium metabolism, bone loss, dehydration patterns in space, and the fluid shift dynamics on return creates a perfect storm for kidney complications. NASA tracks urine composition, kidney imaging, and metabolic markers for extended periods post-mission. There's also emerging research suggesting that kidney function itself may be permanently altered in some astronauts after long-duration flights, and that investigation is ongoing. Number 10, sleep architecture and circadian rhythm disruption. This might sound like the least dramatic item on the list, but stay with me, because the data here is genuinely disturbing. Astronauts in space experience radically different light cycles. On the International Space Station, they witness 16 sunrises every single day. This completely dismantles the body's internal clock. What NASA monitors after landing is not just whether astronauts are sleeping enough, they're tracking the actual architecture of sleep, the stages of deep sleep, REM cycles, and the hormonal rhythms that regulate the body's repair processes. The data shows that circadian disruption from long-duration missions can persist for months after return, and is linked to impaired immune function, cognitive performance deficits, and metabolic irregularities that compound many of the other issues we've already discussed. Sleep is where the body repairs everything. When that process is broken, everything else takes longer to heal. Now here's the thing that ties all 10 of these together. NASA isn't collecting this data just to help the astronauts who already flew. They are building a biological map of what long-duration spaceflight does to the human body because they're planning to go further. Mars missions are on the table. Missions that would last not 6 months, but potentially 2 to 3 years, with no possibility of early return. The astronauts being monitored right now are the test subjects for that future. Their bodies are the data. And what that data says about human survival beyond low Earth orbit is something NASA is studying very carefully before they commit to sending people across that void. The universe is extraordinary, but it is not built for us. And the more we understand about what space does to the human body at this level, the more remarkable it becomes that people are still raising their hands and volunteering to go.